Hi, I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. And Sarah and Al's presentation right before this it, I'm sure you planned it that way, but it's so nice to be able to see the faces of the people that I'm speaking to, at least in that way. And so I'm really grateful that that came right before this. And of course, it's a perfect segue into what I'm going to be talking about in part of my presentation. So um, as Sarah said, I am Karen Jackler, and I'm from the Center for Biologics at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And I'm so honored to be here today. My role at the Center for Biologics is helping to bring the patient voice to the FDA. One of those ways is to talk to people like you, patients and caregivers, about the FDA's efforts to integrate the patient voice into our decision making and to help patients, caregivers, and patient advocacy groups identify ways to be part of the drug development process. So my talk's going to be coming to you from the perspective of the the Center for Biologics, which is we shorthand it as CBER. But much of what I say is going to be, high level and generally true for the FDA. So it should give you, even though I'm speaking from the perspective of my current home office, it is generally true. And in fact, I talked to a lot of colleagues before I did this presentation to sort of vet a couple of things and make sure I've got saying things right. And also in preparing for this I talked with Sarah James and I studied your website, and I know how the KCNQ2 Alliance has been deeply involved in research about the causes of genetic epilepsy, particularly the mutations and the variants of the KCNQ2 gene, and how the gene mutations impact cellular function. I know about your efforts to diagnose earlier. I know about your search for already approved drugs that could treat KCNQ2 epilepsy, and that you're embarking on a natural history study, and then of course about the Cambridge core elements in genetic epilepsy. So I just mentioned this because these are all amazing accomplishments that you guys are undertaking to drive research forward to an effective treatment. And so my goal here today is to help you learn a little about the FDA, and I hope to shed some light on the FDA's role in drug development and what FDA looks for when drug developers request that we approve a new therapy. And most importantly, I'm going to talk to you about patient-focused drug development, which talks about ways you can help the FDA better understand what it's like to be a person with KCNQ2 or a caregiver to that person, and what matters to you when it comes to potential new therapies. Let's see. So that's, I think you're seeing my disclaimer, which basically just says I am definitely here from the FDA, but this is sort of, informal in a lot of ways. So anyway, so I'm going to start with a little bit of history. So the FDA has a fascinating history, and I can spend a lot of time talking about it. And in fact, there have been entire books written on the topic. But I'm just going to pull a couple of highlights here that I hope will shed some light on why the United States has an FDA in the first place, and why evidence of safety and effectiveness are FDA standards for approving new therapies. So one of the first major milestones in FDA history is the Biologics Control Act of 1902. So this was actually the very beginning of federal regulation of any medical products. And it happened because in 1901, 13 children in St. Louis died after receiving a diphtheria antitoxin contaminated with tetanus spores. So the serum had been manufactured in local establishments with no central or uniform controls in place to ensure that the antitoxin was pure, clean and not contaminated with things, and that it was as potent as it should be. So people were getting the right dose. There were also no inspections at the time, or nobody was required to test the final product. So this act, for the first time, required manufacturers of biologics covered in the act to obtain what we call pre-market approval and a license. And it also had labeling and inspection requirements and penalties if you didn't follow this act. So the next milestone came in 1906. And this act was spurred by significant public outcry related to the safety of foods and medicines at the time. And in 1905, there was a series of articles called the Great American Fraud. And this exposed false cure-all claims that were made by some medicines, and also the harms that these medicines were causing. At the time, some of these medicines made claims that just weren't true. They weren't actually doing what they said they were going to do. And in the process, they were actually harming people. And then there was also a book called The Jungle, which if you're my age, you might have had to have read in high school, that revealed how the meat industry was knowingly selling contaminated and tainted meats. And so this brought on the Pure Food and Drug Act, which prohibited the misbranding and adulteration of drug and food products and provided criminal penalties, including imprisonment and fines, if you violated this act. However, it still did not require pre-market approval of drugs. Remember, in 1901, it was just biologics that needed to be pre-approved, but it didn't loop in drugs. And it also didn't address medical devices or cosmetics. So moving along to 1938. So this was enacted in the wake of a tragedy. In 1937, a company introduced an elixir of sulfanilamide, which was a type of antibiotic. And so it was, the antibiotic was mixed in a flavorful liquid, which was touted as this new anti-infective, and it was supposed to be a wonder drug. But the problem was that what they mixed it in was an untested solvent called diethylene glycol, which is chemically related to antifreeze. And by the time the FDA became aware of that problem and removed the product from the pharmacy shelf, the preparation had caused over 100 deaths, including many children across 15 states over a 2-month period. So among its many provisions, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 required evidence of safety before the product could be marketed. Let's see, Public Health Service Act, that's a significant one for where I work in the Center for Biologics, because it's sort of consolidated a bunch of acts that were in different parts of the federal law. And it also gave the FDA some authorities over the spread of infectious diseases. And in 1962, we're getting even closer to where we are now. And with a new drug called the Kefauver-Harris Amendment Act of 1962. And again, this came on the heels of a disaster, but it was that we narrowly averted in the United States, thanks to a hero called Dr. Francis Kelsey. So in this case, thalidomide, which was a new sleeping pill, was found to have caused birth defects in thousands of babies born in Western Europe. And news reports on the role of an FDA medical officer, Dr. Francis Kelsey, in keeping the drug out of the US market increased public support for stronger drug regulation. And so the Kefauver-Harris Drug Amendment Act was passed to ensure drug efficacy. So we had safety before, now we have efficacy, which is the effectiveness of the drug. Does it do what it says it's going to do? So for the first time, drug manufacturers were required to prove to the FDA that products were both safe and effective before they were able to market them. Okay, so that's some very broad strokes of the medical product regulation in the United States. And there have definitely been other significant medical product legislation passed since 1962. And even the acts that I've just covered have been amended many times, but I hope it does help you understand how safety and efficacy have become the bar that the FDA uses for medical products approval. Okay, so here we are at the FDA today. And the FDA's mission is to protect the public health by ensuring safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. So it's a pretty broad remit, and of course, I'm just going to be talking about medical products today, and specifically biologics in the Center for that are regulated by CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And here's just a little quick overview of the medical product centers at the Food and Drug Administration. So there are 3 medical product centers that reside within the FDA, and they are the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, or CBER, and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, as we kind of call ourselves. And CBER is one of the centers, of course, within the FDA structure, and within the centers, there are several offices. And then some of these offices are then broken down into divisions or branches, which sort of contain the teams that review the biologic license applications. All right. And then this is the CBER mission, Center for Biologics, which clearly, it directly supports FDA mission. And so the mission of my center is to ensure the safety, purity, potency, and effectiveness of biological products, including vaccines, allergenics, blood and blood products, cells, tissues, and gene therapies for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of human diseases, conditions, or injury. We also seek to protect the public against the threats of emerging infectious disease and bioterrorism. All right. So as you can tell from those mission statements, we play a critical role in medical product development. Although we don't conduct drug development, FDA doesn't conduct drug development activities or conduct clinical trials. What we do is we conduct oversight through the development process. And that helps us to be able to advise companies on their development programs. And this advice sometimes helps to strengthen a development program, and it helps to protect patients and to make sure that products continue to be safe and effective once they're on the market. So this figure provides an overview of the product development process and the major stages of bringing medical products to market. So starting with the first step, which is development, or sort of this preclinical phase. So typically this is where researchers discover new potential therapies, and this can be done through, finding new insights into a disease process that can allow researchers to design a product to stop or reverse the effects of disease. This is also a phase where researchers can test molecular compounds to find possible beneficial effects against a large number of diseases. This is a stage where you can see if an existing treatment might have an unanticipated effect on a different disease. And you can also see, this is also a time where researchers might look at new technologies, such as those that provide new ways to target medical products to specific sites within the body or to manipulate genetic material. So this is all done before. This is I think what's important here in development and preclinical is that this is research that is not done on humans. This is research that might be done on cells derived from animals or humans, or in animals. And sometimes this is referred to as in vitro research. And so as I said, this work comes before human studies, and it consists of various tests to evaluate safety and provides information to support the initial human doses of the drug. So the next phase is clinical trials, which I know patients are very, very interested in. So clinical trials are the studies of therapies in humans, and it's conducted in a sequence, often referred to as phases 1, 2, and 3, that build on the knowledge accumulated from non-clinical and maybe even previous clinical trials to collect safety and effectiveness data. So I'll discuss a little bit more about clinical trial phases in a moment, but I just want to give this broad overview first. So you'll see this green rectangle down here that says IND, submission. And IND means investigational new drug applications. And INDs are requests from sponsors or drug developers for the FDA to authorize administration of an investigational drug or biological product to humans. So before authorizing a clinical trial, the FDA will look at the preclinical data collected to see if it supports a clinical trial, and to see that the sponsor is following laws and regulations that are intended, among other things, to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of people who are participating in the trial. And if the trial goes as planned, so we kind of move through here and to the blue arrow here. If the clinical trial goes as planned, the sponsor would submit a BLA, which stands for a biologic license application, to the FDA. And this is a request for permission from the FDA to introduce a biologic to the market for patients in general to use. For a drug, this would be called a new drug application. But as I'm sort of talking from the viewpoint again from the Center for Biologics. So at this point, the drug company will submit a scientific and clinical data on safety and efficacy from the clinical trial. And the FDA will assess this information to see if it meets the FDA standard of approval. And post-market is the phase after a drug is on the market. So it's important, even if you've shown safety and effectiveness of a drug, it's important for drug developers to show its continued safety and effectiveness once it's out there and physicians are able to prescribe it, use it, and it becomes used by patients. So, so the FDA expects drug manufacturers to monitor therapies that have been approved to make sure they remain safe and effective, and to report those problems to the FDA. And in some cases, the FDA may allow a drug to be marketed with certain questions still remaining, such as long-term safety outcomes. So a company may be required to conduct additional clinical studies for a certain amount of time after an approval. So that's sort of the broad strokes of the sort of product development, from development to being put on the market. So let me dive a little deeper into clinical trials. So this slide illustrates a standard approach to clinical trials for development of conventional drugs. So you'll see in this model that phase 1 and 2 are exploratory. Phase 1 studies of conventional drugs typically are performed in a small number of healthy adults to assess safety, and then that data guides dosing and monitoring for the phase 2 trial, which involves more patients, and it primarily assesses the magnitude of the effects on particular endpoints. And endpoints is sort of FDA and drug sponsor speak for what are the events or outcomes that the clinical trial is measuring to determine if the therapy has a benefit. And so this data will guide the design of the phase 3 trials, which are sometimes called confirmatory trials. So the phase 3 trials involve many more patients and gather evidence on safety and effective of a much larger scale, to support marketing applications. So the structure of a drug development program is shaped by many considerations and comprised of studies with different objectives, different designs, and different dependencies. So not every phase we talk about may be distinct or will be seen in every program. For example, cell and gene therapy products are not conventional drugs and are often used to treat rare and even ultra-rare diseases. And because of this, the early phase studies, the phase 1 and 2, often look at effectiveness, which can support licensure as well as safety, and typically include patients affected with the disease or condition rather than healthy subjects. So I think that's important to remember as well. So that's a quick overview of the drug development process. But what I hope I was able to convey is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And this is why we always encourage drug developers to come to talk to us. I think particularly with a disease like KCNQ2, which is ultra rare, and you have a small population of patients with it, it's really important to design a drug development program very carefully so that you're making the most of the patients you have, and you are really focusing in on what is important to patients. So now that we've talked about drug development process, I want to give you an idea of the FDA's approval process. And I'll start by just talking about the members of a review team. So a review team, like, there's no one single person who reviews a product when it comes to the FDA for approval. And the same is true for clinical trials that IND request as well. So the review teams are made up of multiple disciplines, and this includes a regulatory project manager who that person's responsibility is to coordinate the activity of this team of people that you see here throughout the review process, and that's the primary contact for the sponsor. And then there's a whole lot happening. You have a medical officer who is usually a physician who reviews all the clinical study information and data before, during, and after the trials, a clinical trial is complete. You have a statistician who analyzes the clinical trial designs and interprets the clinical data and works closely with the medical officer to evaluate the protocols and safety and efficacy data. Pharmacologists review the preclinical studies. You have chemists that evaluate the drug's chemical compounds and how the drug was made, its stability, how is the quality controlled, how have they tested for the presence of impurities. You have microbiologists, you have people who look at the manufacturing process. I think that's something that not everybody, I mean, certainly people understand when we look at clinical trials and we look at the drug itself, but we also look at the ability of a sponsor to continue manufacturing that drug in a way that is safe for people. You know, can they make sure this product is the same every single time they put it out? And we have people who go out and inspect facilities, and it's a huge effort with a lot of people with a lot of different expertise. When I worked in the Center for Devices, there are even engineers over there that look at these devices. So it's a big job with a lot of very, very smart people who are indeed much smarter than I am in many ways, helping to get these drugs out there, get these therapies out there in a way that is safe, you know, to ensure the safety and effectiveness of the whatever is out there for you guys. So let's see. So that's the team. Let's see. So this team is responsible for evaluating the data submitted by sponsors against approval requirements documented in the Code of Federal Regulations. So there is sort of some high-level information out there in the Code of Federal Regulations, but in general terms, the approval of an application requires that the application meets safety, efficacy, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. So that's why all those different disciplines are involved. So the approval of drugs and biologics must be based on substantial evidence of effectiveness and evidence of safety. and evidence of safety should be obtained from adequate and well-controlled studies. And I think what's important here is that certain aspects of product development are feasible for common diseases may not be feasible for rare diseases. And so FDA's regulations provide flexibility in applying its regulatory standards. And because all medical products have adverse effects, the demonstration of safety requires showing that the benefits of the product outweigh its risks. And these important considerations include the therapeutic context in which the drug will be used, the evidence submitted in the pre-market application or generated in the post-market setting that informs FDA's understanding of the benefits and risks of the drugs, any remaining uncertainties about the drug's benefits and risks, and any options FDA might have to sort of reduce uncertainties and manage risks once a drug is on the market. So this actually brings me to the importance of patient engagement, because patients' perspectives play an important role in determining how FDA considers benefits and risks of a new therapy. Patients and caregivers like you are in a unique position to provide information like insights on specific issues, your needs and priorities that are important to you and your family members. Your perspectives, diverse opinions, and experiences shed light on issues such as risk tolerance and potential benefit, and your perspectives on participating in a clinical trial. And you provide very real, everyday experiences in real-world settings, which remind us of the human element and that patients are at the heart of our work. So the FDA invites patients and caregivers to share your perspectives in a number of ways. But I'll sort of start about the evolution, just a couple seconds here on the evolution of patient engagement. I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but it's a very pretty slide, but it's also very wordy. So engaging with patients has always been part of FDA's DNA, though some will pinpoint the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the 80s as a pivotal point in patient engagement. So that was around 1988 when there was an Office of AIDS Coordination established, and that's grown and that's evolved. I think sort of an important point in the evolution came in 2012 when the FDA expanded engagement and put greater focus on the role of patients in the overall development of new medical products. And this includes the initiation of the patient-focused drug development meetings, a patient engagement advisory committee for medical devices, a patient engagement collaborative focused on how to achieve more meaningful patient engagement in general, and a program with the National Organization for Rare Disorders for listening sessions and other efforts. There's been sort of a boom in how we can open that door to patients in recent years. So I want to talk about some of the specific ways that patients and caregivers can engage with the FDA. So this is sort of a brief list. We have a couple of programs, and I'm going to start with these at the top. And these are typically by application. Patient representatives can apply to the FDA and have sort of a time-limited service, and this includes the Patient Representative Program, which is a program that's been around since 1993. And patient representatives provide direct input into the agency's decision-making process. And currently there are patient representatives for over 300 diseases and conditions. And patient representatives also participate on FDA advisory committees, which is a mechanism that the FDA uses to get input on certain new therapies, or even sometimes policies or other programs. And review divisions can give assignments to a patient if they want to get some more patient insight on a particular aspect of something they have in front of them. The Center for Devices and Radiological Health has set up an advisory committee of patients. It's solely of patients and caregivers and patient organizations, which is unusual because most advisory committees have one patient representative, and then it's mostly comprised of scientists and physicians in a specific area. But this one is only patients. And it is to assure that the needs and experiences of patients are included as part of the FDA deliberations on issues involving the regulation of medical devices and their use by patients. And then there's the Patient Engagement Collaborative, which is a joint initiative of FDA and the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative this was established in 2017. And this is a group of patient organizations and individual representatives who discuss how to achieve more meaningful patient engagement in medical product development and other regulatory discussions at the FDA. So those are sort of by application, and those, so they come open on a rolling basis or as the FDA needs them. And the next ones I'm going to talk to are open to anyone as the opportunity arises. So the FDA has public meetings and workshops, and they are open to the public. We always include a public comment session where anyone can sign up to provide their perspective on the topic of the meeting. And I've heard people provide their personal perspectives, as well as heard organizations make a statement on behalf of their members. So that's an opportunity both as an individual or as an organization representing patients to provide some input. And dockets, which is public comment through regulations.gov. And that's another way the federal government asks for public comment. After a meeting or after the FDA releases a document, typically a guidance document, the FDA typically continues to collect public comments for a period of time, generally 30 to 60 days. And this input becomes part of what FDA considers before it makes a decision. So I think the next couple are going to be, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about these last three, because these are the mechanisms that allow patients to initiate engagement with the FDA. And I think that's what's been most unique about in the past, since 2012, is that there are now mechanisms for patients to say, we have something to say, and it's not on a topic that is on your agenda at the moment, but we have something to say. So the first is patient listening sessions, which are hosted, I should actually move to the next slide. Here we go, patient listening sessions. These are hosted by FDA in collaboration with the National Organization for Rare Disorders and the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA. And this is one of the ways that patients can share their experience with living with and managing a disease or condition. And it's typically a small group of patients and caregivers, and you can talk directly to FDA scientific staff. These are informal, non-public, non-advisory meetings with the patient community and FDA only. And it's a great starting point to help FDA staff understand what you're experiencing, and to inform regulatory decision-making, and to inform early stage research and development. It's disease focused, so it's not an avenue for endorsing specific medical products. It's really about your disease, and you can talk about, it includes talking about what you value most in a therapy, or how you're experiencing current therapies. Sometimes there are upsides and sometimes there are downsides. And so it's a good avenue to talk about that, but it's not intended to talk about a specific medical product. And it includes staff from 2 or more of the medical product centers. And we're in listening mode. We may ask follow-up questions, but we're generally there to listen to you, to hear what's going on with you, and to take that in. So far there have been over 26 listening sessions initiated by patients since late 2018, when the program started. Another thing to note is that these are not recorded, but if the patient group wants to submit a summary to us, we'll post it on our website, and that becomes a place where FDA staff and any stakeholder can access this information. So the FDA, there are staff dedicated to working with external groups, patient groups, to set up the listening sessions. And I can sort of give you a link I have a link at the end that takes you to a place that can help, almost like a clearinghouse, a portal that can help you find those groups to talk to if it's something you're interested in. But another thing that's interesting about this mechanism is that FDA can initiate a listening session too. So if there are staff who have something in front of them and they really think the patient perspective would help them better understand an issue, they can talk to the staff who are in charge of rare disease listening sessions and sort of start a process to get in direct contact with some patients. So some of the questions that review staff have asked patients include, how are you experiencing your current treatments? And what side effects might they tolerate or not tolerate from current or future treatments? What aspects of a clinical trial might make them more or less likely to participate? And these are typically conducted as sort of a round-robin style interview. There are typically 5 or 6 patients. They're done over the phone or on Zoom. The National Organization for Rare Disorders helps us to locate a patient organization and then to help identify patients to invite to participate. Let's see, another thing to remember for people participating is that we do our best to protect patients' privacy. You know, people can use their first names only. They can choose to be called by a different name if they like. If it's on Zoom, we don't use cameras. You can change your screen name. I think the idea here is that we want the discussions to be frank, as we do with all of these, but we also want to protect your privacy. We also know that it's sometimes very difficult to talk about how you're experiencing the disease, both as a patient and as a caregiver. And so I think it just gives people a little bit of cover to be frank and to be vulnerable as well. So FDA, on the FDA side, we've initiated 12 different topics. And sometimes the topics include more than one listening session, especially if the review staff is interested in different populations, such as if you're a caregiver of a young child. Adolescents have their own perspectives on things. Adults experience diseases differently. So it can vary. The number and sort of focus can vary depending on the topic. Okay, I'm going to talk about next patient-focused drug development meetings. So like the listening sessions, the patient-focused drug development meetings are a way that patients can share their experience living with and managing a disease and condition. And the meeting, again, is disease-focused. And the topics often covered include an overview of the condition and current treatment. So sort of like typically a physician who is well known in the field will just sort of give an overview to the audience. It includes, and then the other topics where we're hearing from patients include the symptoms and daily impacts that matter most to patients. So they'll describe their day-to-day impacts, most significant symptoms or limitations on their life. We'll look at patients' perspectives on current approaches to treatment, such as how well do treatments work and what are the significant downsides of the treatments that might be currently out there, and what would you look for in an ideal treatment. So these are generally formatted as a town hall style meeting where there's a moderated discussion. They'll have, typically there's a panel of patients or caregivers, maybe 5 or 6, and they'll provide a brief overview, speaking to the topic of that section of the meeting, and then it'll open up into a large group discussion that includes patients and caregivers in the audience. And that can, if it's in person, it can be in person. There's a lot of people also make accommodations so people can call in if they can't attend in person. And that's actually been common during COVID as well, to have sort of because all of the ones since COVID have been virtual. So the audience can include FDA staff, industry, academia, healthcare providers. The outreach is done by the group organizing the meeting. So who you want in the meeting is up to you, whoever's organizing it. And the focus is on the patient perspective. So the stakeholders other than the patients, the people in the audience, other than patients, they're in listening mode. So they're there to absorb what you have to say and not challenge it or ask questions or provide suggestions. It's all about you. So the FDA has led 30 patient-focused drug development meetings, and most of them have been between, so the FDA has led 30 patient-focused drug development meetings, just the FDA. This doesn't include the ones that patient groups have initiated. And most of the ones FDA have led were between 2012 and 2017. And those are topics that we decided with input from the FDA and the patient community. Since 2015, there have been over 50 externally led meetings. And so those came about because when the FDA first was leading them between 2012 and 2017, we recognized that there were many disease areas that can be addressed beyond the ones that FDA planned. And so to help expand the benefits of the FDA's patient-focused drug development meeting initiative, we welcome patients to identify and organize patient-focused collaborations to generate public input on other disease areas. And it is based on the process that we established in the FDA-led meetings. And there are staff that are assigned to advise patient groups in planning an external meeting. So it's, if you decide, if a group decides to have one, you're not out there alone. There are, in addition to being lots of models out there, there are staff that can step you through that process. We have monthly meetings with the patient group to see how they're going, see how it's going, help them avoid pitfalls that we've seen. So there's a lot of effort. We don't plan the meeting, we don't plan the agenda. That's up to the patient groups, but we do provide some advice in the background that we hope is helpful to the group. And then next, patient organization meetings. So sometimes patient groups have a need to interact with the FDA that just doesn't fit into any of the types of channels that I've described. And this typically happens when we have groups working on types of studies called patient preference studies that are aimed at measuring how patients trade off benefits and risks associated with a potential gene therapy. We wanted feedback on data collection tools. We've had patient groups who have talked to us about how to modify standardized tools for measuring cognitive ability. The standard tool doesn't do a good job of picking up small but meaningful cognitive changes in that patient group. So they said about modifying it for their patient group. And they came to us for some input on how the FDA might consider this evidence and what they could do to optimize it for regulatory decision making. So all three of the medical product centers are typically interested in these kinds of discussions with patient groups. And we have contact points for requesting the meetings as well. So let's see. So how can patient engagement affect drug development? All right. So you guys might remember this slide from before, but I've added some examples of how patient engagement can inform drug development along the drug development process. So during the preclinical during the preclinical phase, before clinical trials begin, patient input helps us to better understand which impacts of a condition matter most to patients and help us to understand how to best measure those impacts. And when I say us, it's the FDA, but it's also the larger drug development community. It's important that the whole community consider patient input from beginning to end, or the whole drug development community. So when planning, here we are, so at clinical trials. When planning clinical trials, patient input can help us understand what aspects of the trials can be better tailored to meet the needs of patients who may participate. Patient input can be used to develop outcome assessments over here in the marketing applications, and patient preference information that can help quantify benefit risk assessments, and can help the FDA figure out what that balance is when it's making its assessment of a marketing application. And then finally, the post-marketing phase, patient input can inform how we communicate information to patients and prescribers. So I'm just going to go quickly through this because I want to leave time for questions. So there's some other efforts going on. So in addition to input, there are efforts going on to broaden the methodologies that go into state patient-focused drug development. And so there's a set of guidances that's sort of meant to help stakeholders, including patient organizations, academic researchers, drug developers, systematically take patient experiences and sort of meaningfully incorporate them into medical product development. So the first step is sort of about this, the collecting of narratives from patient experience, about patient experience, and how you can move that into who do you collect that from and why, and so that feeds into the next phase. Okay, so how do you, now that you have those narratives, how do you identify what's important to patients? How do you start to move that into something that's quantifiable? So it talks a lot about developing surveys and methods for collecting additional data about what's important to patients. And how do you do that in a way that is scientifically sound, so that the methodologies aren't biased, so that and it truly presents the patient's perspectives. And then this sort of goes on to, okay, so how do you, now that you have information about what matters, not everything you've gathered can be measured. So how do you select what to measure? How do you develop methods and tools that are appropriate for the populations? How do you make sure they're valid and reliable? And then there's the fourth guidance is sort of, it takes that to the next level, and it discusses how do you incorporate these, perhaps, guidance 3, you were able to develop tools. Okay, so how do you make those tools into something that can be used into a clinical trial? So I think what's important to take away from this slide about the guidances and slide before this is that patient engagement in drug development is not a single event, and it's not limited to a single type of information. Patient engagement is most effective when it's part of an overall drug development process, when patients and other stakeholders work together to translate a patient's lived experience into the science of drug development. And I'll just sort of quickly, so those 4 guidances that I was talking about are specific to patient-focused drug developments, but we've incorporated references back to this initiative and other guidances, and this encourages people who are working on different aspects of drug development in different program spaces to bring the patient perspective into that work. So one example is this suite of gene therapy guidances that was issued in 2018. And those that are focused on diseases include this small but really important sentence that says patient experience data may provide important additional information about the clinical benefit of a gene therapy product. FDA encourages sponsors to collect patient experience data during product development and to submit such data in the marketing application. So we really mean it. We really want people to collect patient experiences. We really want researchers and sponsors to go out and work with patients. And then more recently, I hope you remember that we were talking about benefit risk and how important all that safety and efficacy for it sort of feeds into this, what are the benefits and risks? How does that weigh out, and how that is important to FDA decision making? And so we recently put out some additional guidance. And again, this is broadly, this is to industry, this is to researchers, this is to anybody working in therapy development, that patient experience data can help inform critical aspects of a drug development program and assessment more broadly. And there's
Karen,
a lot of, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, we're just hearing from some of our presenters. We are so lucky. We've had a couple of presenters who are able to present, but they're going to be live and they're going to lose their windows. I feel terrible because we shortchanged you on the front end of your presentation by coming late to you. So you have our sincere apologies. These are the challenges of doing these Zoom calls live. I know. So here's what I would like to do, and you tell me if this works for you. I know that you and I are going to talk, and we're going to talk to some others at the FDA coming up towards the end of the month. I want to assure everybody in our community that this is an ongoing conversation with our, pals at the FDA. We're excited about all that we can learn, and how, I guess what I want to say from us is we want to help you at the FDA. And this has been a fantastic primer on how we can do that.
Yes, there's lots of opportunities. I will put my email in the chat if anybody wants to. I'll put all this information in the chat, and I will let you move on. I really wish we'd had time for questions, but do send me some.
Well, I was going to say, if you pop into the chat, I don't know if you can see them, but there are questions, and you can just feel free to answer in the chat. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there are some right there. And the other thing is we can send them to you, because I feel terrible and I feel terrible for our families too. I'm just going to give you one really quickly. For example, would you happen to know the FDA's stance on streamlining compassionate usage for Zen 496 to those not accepted into the ongoing Xenon trials? So this is a stage 3 drug development. So there are some really, of great interest to the foundation, to parents. Do you happen to know the answer to that? I'll just throw that one out.
Yeah, I don't happen to know the answer, but I'll see if I can, while I'm here, pull some information and put it in the chat. I mean, usually, I know you need to move on, but I'll do what I can
want to hear
in the chat. So, so you're talking about compassionate use, or?
Yes. In other words, if there would be a way for parents whose children are not included in that original catchment, if they would be able to apply to use it as compassionate use while it's in a stage 3 trial.
Yeah, there is a program at the FDA, and I will give you the link. I don't know specifically about this, if FDA has a stance on that, but there's a process to go through, and generally people are able to sort of work through that process fairly quickly. It sort of, there's like a sort of a list of reasons it qualifies for, and it's also on the sponsor end as well. There has to be agreement on the sponsor end, because there are considerations they have in terms of being able to successfully complete the clinical trial as they intended it to be able to get the information that they need to get FDA approval. So it's, there are different things to consider. I don't know the specifics. I just know that it takes both sort of sides sort of agreeing to it.
Well, you know what? I'm going to ask if you don't mind to have a look at that chat and see if there's questions that you can jump on and answer. And then if we don't get them asked and answered, we can have our families send those questions to us. And then is it okay, Karen, if we can send them on to you for you to have a look at and see if you can answer them?
Yeah, that'd be great.